What if I told you that this Mario on the left rendered faster than the Mario on the right, despite having physics bones, higher resolution textures and shading details? Well, it does, and I'll explain how and why eventually, but today we have a much more manageable task to get started with: the Goomba. But before that, shoutouts to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. I have made it my mission to develop a complete sequel to Mario 64, running on real Nintendo 64 with 15 new courses, a completely reworked engine, and new enemies and objectives. Of course, I love Mario 64, so I am trying to keep the game feeling and physics the same, minus some jank. I don't think anyone lost this half circle Mario does when he tried to turn around from a standstill, for example. This way, I've already increased the frame rate by a factor of 5 on real hardware, which now allows me to render much more complex levels like this one or even this one here on a real Nintendo 64. I've released a playable demo of this as proof as well 3 months ago, so you know I'm not just making stuff up. The Mario 64 enemy models were made on a super old tool called N-World, early into 3D art's existence and with little knowledge of how the N64 hardware actually works. That means that, of course, one part of this full rework process is that I will have to rework all the enemies and NPCs from the original game that I'd like to use in my game, which includes the Goombas from Mario 64. For almost every actor I've looked at, we can make them look better, render cheaper, and use less memory. I have to give a big shout out to back here, because he's helping me with the art part of this, while I'm more of a technical artist. He's always doing post-case editing work to make the models that much better. While this sounds like a monumental undertaking, we're actually already done with this, and now I'm just documenting what we've done and the tricks we figured out after the fact. But let's focus on remaking the Goomba. Now, while he has a lot of missed optimization, we should first focus on how he actually looks. The Goomba in Mario 64 is weird looking. Let's be real, Goombas have never looked like this before or after Mario 64, and it's probably due to early 3D jank. If you look at promotional 3D renders of the Goomba, it is apparent that this is likely not what they had intended the Goomba to turn out like. Especially when you also look at the 2D Goombas from Mario Bros. 3, or even the other Nintendo 64 Goombas from Mario Party, the shape is completely different. I'm not sure what happened. Maybe this was supposed to look like a mix from the Galoomba from Mario World and the Goomba from Mario Bros. 1? Or maybe even a reference to Mario Land? Either way, I think the best thing to do is to update this design to something that matches the later Nintendo 64 games. This coincidentally also looks a lot like the modern Goombas, so I'd say we're moving in the right direction. The first thing I need to change is his body shape. Goombas just aren't thimble shaped, so his updated body has a bit more of a mushroom Goomba shape. I think what's interesting here is that this little part of his body flipped between being concave and convex throughout all previous iterations on the Nintendo 64, so having it right in the middle I think is a good choice. Next, his eyebrows. While they don't look that wrong compared to the newer N64 games, they are much bigger and protrude past his face. We'll make them a separate triangle so they can exist in 3D space. We've also updated the feet shape. This is not because there's anything wrong with the looks of his original feet, they are just very polygonally inefficient. What do I mean by that? Look at this shape here, for example. This is a hexagonal cylinder. If you wanted this to be a round shape, this would be a very inefficient way to do this. Now look at this. All I did was twist the bottom shape by 30 degrees. This makes it look much rounder with no extra polygons. Very polygonally efficient. This is the technique Nintendo had adapted as early as Ocarina of Time, and it really paid off. Now, with those changes, what if I told you that this new Goomba already has 25% less polygons? I hope that surprises you, because I don't want you to perceive him as being lower poly. But he is. We saved 37 triangles in total, 14 on each foot and 9 on his body. But the lower polygon count is not the only reason this model renders faster. In fact, that is the smallest aspect of performance improvement. Optimizing for the Nintendo 64 is all about memory bandwidth, to the point that even compiling code on OFast, the compiler option that tries to minimize CPU cycles, produces a slower game most of the time than compiling code on OS, the compiler option that tries to minimize code size. That is the biggest bottleneck on this console, even for rendering. Rendering one triangle takes about 200 bytes of memory throughput when it's not cold, and maybe 20 bytes when it is cold. With 37 triangles, about half of them being cold, that would be about 4 kilobytes of memory throughput, or about the same cost as loading a single texture. We'll find much bigger optimizations when looking at the materials and textures. The original Goomba uses a 32 by 32 RGBA 16 texture for his face. That is a full 2 kilobytes of texture memory. We can limit his face texture to 256 colors, which lets us get away with a palette texture, saving us a lot of data throughput. Well, okay, actually, we just made a completely new texture for him. And I made it double the resolution, which cancels out the performance benefit, but it looks a lot nicer. But you get the idea, you basically lose no detail by limiting the palette to 256 different colors on such a monocolored texture. Similarly, his little billboarded body part here also uses a 32 by 32 RGBA 16 texture in the vanilla game, but since it is just a solid color sphere, we can simply replace it with an intensity alpha texture, which only takes 4 bits per pixel instead of the 16 bits that an RGBA 16 texture would take, and then we can color it in with vertex colors. This same texture also has this eyebrow texture, so we are able to add the eyebrows with no additional texture loads. I am not sure why they used an RGBA 16 texture here. They do use some intensity alpha textures elsewhere in the game. They might just not have realized that it would make a difference. Now, there's one huge issue with his feet. They use a whole separate material in the vanilla Goomba. This wouldn't be a big deal normally, but with Sauron's new F3DX3 microcode, if you're not using separate materials, rendering will be batched. What does batching mean, I hear you ask? It means we can render a subsequent Goomba without reloading the texture, which saves us one whole texture of memory throughput. In the original game, each consequent Goomba we render, we would spend one whole texture memory fill just on reloading the same texture over and over, which is not good. More on that in the final comparison. One last performance improvement we need to go over is the Armature. An Armature is the skeleton that we can move to animate the Goomba, plus some extra bones for functionality like the billboarded body or the eyes animating. My new Armature has 7 bones. 1 for his body, 2 for each leg and foot, a billboard bone for the body, and a switch bone for his blinking eyes. This leg bone wasn't there in the original model, and that put some serious restrictions on his walk animation. You can see he's just kinda bopping his feet up and down when he walks. So considering I added 2 bones to him, how many bones did the original model have? 12? What? How? This is a thing that consistently happens in Mario 64. I think the exporting tools back then, when they made this game, had a bug, resulting in almost every animated bone to double up. This is extremely expensive because it forces the game to compute twice as many matrices. Now, if you were observant, you'll notice that that only accounts for 10 bones. The other 2 bones are a scale bone and a shadow bone. Scale bones are interesting. This is a trick they used a lot in Mario 64. You see, vertices are relatively coarse in Mario 64's coordinate system. This RuneScape clip visualizes this well. The vertices have to snap to a grid. Mario 64 has this issue too, but to a much lesser degree. So what Nintendo would often do is add a scale bone that scales the model to quarter size, which would then give them 4 times higher precision. While that sounds really smart, unfortunately, doing it this way is nonsense. A scale bone will add an entire matrix multiplication and generation, and this is unnecessary because actors already have a scale functionality built in. Goombas are already scaled by 1.5 once, and then their bone scales them by 0.25 again, which is needlessly expensive. You could just scale them by 0.375 once, and then you don't have to deal with all this extra expense. The other extra bone is a shadow bone. The vanilla Mario 64 engine needed an extra bone just for this, but my engine just has shadow support baked in. It's slightly faster that way, but honestly explaining why or how is tangential to this video. Now consider this. Mario 64 renders in layers. There is a background layer, an opaque layer, an opaque decal layer, an unused opaque layer, a cutout layer, a transparent decal layer, and an unused transparent layer. Each layer has a separate render list, the geometry is appended to, and then the layers are rendered in that order. The system has great potential, but it seems they completely overlooked the implications of this. Having it work this way means that if we only have one material per layer on an actor, we can keep the render state untouched through multiple of the same actor instances at the same time, effectively making all the Goombas render with just 2 material setting ups. The Nintendo 64 doesn't really have draw codes, but it does have RDP and RSP states that you can edit, and I would say that editing those is basically equivalent to what a draw call would be on modern hardware. And we're basically reducing all of that to just one draw call this way. Let's compare. Look at this. Here's my engine rendering 50 vanilla Goombas, and the frame rate does not like this. Now look at this. Here's my engine rendering 50 Rework Goombas. Much better. This gigantic improvement is mostly from the game now being able to skip reloading all of the Goomba textures between drawings. After all, filling the texture memory just once takes about 31 microseconds. And doing this 50 times less will save us about 1500 microseconds. But that is not all. This would be a lame rework if all I did was change the visuals a little bit and upgraded the performance. We've got a bunch of new extra features. In this game, during underground levels, the Goombas will load a blue texture to mirror how they work in Super Mario Bros. 1. This is entirely free of runtime cost because I can just dynamically edit the model palette at runtime. I've also added plenty of Goombas with odd behaviors to this game, like the ones in the zoo here that like to sleep or swing on tire swings. There's also Goombas that bully other NPCs that you have to get rid of to make some progress. There's Goombas that work on Bowser's oil rig, and you can really mess with them. This guy in particular is my favorite. There's even Goombas that just chill at Bowser's theme park location, and they love your Mario cosplay. There's more, but I don't want to spoil anything else. You'll have to experience this all by yourself once the game is finally released. And this is the before versus after. Here are the 107 triangles versus 144 triangles. Rendering one vanilla Goomba should take about 250 microseconds, while the new model should cost about 180 microseconds. The CPU cost should also be doubled on the old model because of all the extra animation bones. At 10 Goombas, we're looking at 2200 microseconds versus 1260 microseconds on a new Goomba. More than a 40% improvement. Of course, my approximation here is not perfect, because it depends on a bunch of minor factors that come into play only at runtime, but it should be a good enough approximation to visualize the performance difference. So after all that, which one do you prefer? Any changes you would like to see? Let me know what you think in the comments. Shoutouts to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Squarespace gives you all the tools you need to offer services or get paid with your own customizable website. Streamline your workflow with built-in appointment scheduling and professional on-brand invoices. Squarespace makes it easy to make your own website and go online. They even help you buy a domain without any hidden fees. Plus, they have privacy and security tools to help your website stay online. They also offer design tools so anyone can build a decent website. They have customizable templates for you, and you can edit everything via simple drag and drops. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Kaze to save 10% of your first purchase of a website or a domain. Shoutouts to all my Patreons for supporting my videos. Making videos on top of developing this whole game is a lot of cumbersome but necessary work, so thanks to everyone who supports me. Look forward to more updates about my game soon. Until then, bye bye.